I guess you, like me, were eager to hear Monday's announcement of the roadmap out of lockdown, impatient to discover when we might meet up with family and friends, book a holiday, have a haircut. Careful not to raise our hopes. Data, not dates, we were told, would provide the model for life returning to something that will involve a lot more social contact than we have now. There is an end to our isolation in sight, helped of course by the vaccination programme, although social distancing, care with hygiene, etc. will remain in place for some time to come. It isn't time to party yet. There are plenty of challenges ahead. This time, though, we saw a Boris who, at last, understood the importance of doing it right. Mark's Gospel is a succession of challenges to make up our minds about the way our lives should be, the routes we should take. It is a fast-moving account with vivid pictures to prove beyond a doubt that Jesus is the Messiah, making it clear the kind of discipleship we are being called to and to encourage a positive response. The early chapters deal with Jesus' baptism, temptation in the wilderness, and the call of the disciples. We listen to Jesus' teaching, see him in action, but soon we see that the disciples struggle to comprehend who he is. As they arrive at Caesarea Philippi, an especially pagan city, Jesus changes direction with his followers, asking, "Who do people say I am?" It is headstrong, impetuous Peter who answers, "You are the Messiah." I can almost hear the sigh of relief. At last you have seen and understood. It's a bit like the teacher who can only move on to the next stage in mathematics once her pupils have learned basic addition and subtraction. Now the real teaching can begin. His roadmap can be revealed. The Son of Man must suffer, be rejected, killed, and will rise from the dead. The new lesson is that Jesus is walking to his death. It's not just a risky gamble. There is nothing that can be done to avert it. This is the only way to ensure the coming of God's kingdom here on earth. And from this point on, Jesus speaks plainly and directly to his disciples about his death and resurrection. This is the first of 3 times, that he tells them that he would die soon. "But hold on, that's just not possible," says a rather indignant Peter. "That's not what messiahs are supposed to do." It would be a bit like a football captain telling his team that he was intending to let the opposition score 10 goals right away. Peter wanted Christ to be king, but not the suffering servant prophesied in Isaiah 53. He was ready to receive the glory of following the Messiah, but not the persecution. As Charlie Brown once said, "Winning ain't everything, but losing ain't anything." We heard in last week's reading that as soon as God had said to Jesus, "You are my Son, the beloved, with you I am well pleased," Satan tested him in the wilderness. Mark 1:11-13. Now Jesus recognizes Satan at work again as Peter tries to deflect him from his faithfulness to God in his service of others. Jesus refuses to succumb to this temptation to disobey God by focusing on human ambition rather than divine providence. So important is this teaching that anyone standing in its way, opposing it, must be seen as satanic. "You are setting your mind, Peter," Jesus tells him, "on human things, which will mean backing off from the plan God has. Give in to temptation and give the easy answers. Tell people what they want to hear. to do God's work on their terms, rather than shining the light of God's standards on all that they are and all that they do. However, the real shock for his disciples and the crowd that was with them must surely have been that not only was Jesus walking towards certain death, so must anyone who would be a disciple of his. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Jesus isn't using cross-bearing to describe the human experience of carrying some burden through life as we would use the expression today. His listeners knew that carrying a cross meant going to execution. Cross-bearing as a follower of Jesus means nothing less than giving one's whole life over to him. And here comes another surprise. This is the way of total freedom. If you clutch your life to yourself, protecting it against others, asserting all your rights, needs and privileges, you lose it because it isn't life any longer. But if you acknowledge that life is not yours by right, that all is privilege, and that it is to be lived in the self-giving love that the gospel reveals, then you possess it wholly. There is nothing to lose and everything to gain. Verse 35, whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. You may gain all the world's riches, but lose the inner freedom of living and being loved by God. The apparently shocking and gloomy news of the cross is actually the way to total freedom and fulfillment. Peter's response marks a turning point. Although his progress is faltering, as becomes apparent as we read on in the Gospels. However, despite the necessary rebuke, 6 days later, Peter is included in Jesus' transfiguration, helping him to see that the way of the cross is indeed the path to glory. Peter had made the life-changing discovery that Jesus is the Christ, and despite mistakes and denials, he went on to a life of service and Christian discipleship, making known the story of Jesus in ways that others were able to test in their own lives. This, then, is our challenge. We are not being taken on a pleasant afternoon hike, but a walk into possible danger and risk. Answering the call to follow Jesus is more than a few minor adjustments in our ordinary lives. It may entail us facing up to difficulties rather than running away from them or giving up in despair. It may entail living a life open to others, offering compassion and love when you scarcely have anything left to give. It may entail facing up to the need to question and maybe change ways of doing things that will make us vulnerable and insecure. New insights, new choices and challenges will inevitably be part of our journey, but with our minds set on God rather than ourselves, we can, like the psalmist, have complete assurance that despite opposition, suffering and rejection by others, he has not hidden his face, we read. He listens to his cry for help. For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over all the nations. Jesus is inviting us to join him on a journey with a roadmap which leads to eternity. Let us use this time of Lent to consider how we will proceed. For he invites us to a way of celebration, meeting and feasting with the humble and the poor. He beckons us to a way of risk, letting go of our security. He challenges us to listen to the voices of those who have nothing to lose. He points us to a way of self-giving, where power and status are overturned. He calls us to follow the way of the cross, where despair is transformed by the promise of new life. Let us walk his way with joy. Amen.